Good afternoon and welcome to Right Now here on 95.3 FM, 1400 AM, WILI. I am Chris Reddy. I have in studio with me one of my co-hosts, Mike Desaulniers. Our other co-host is out of the studio today, but I hope that he will be back with us for maybe Monday's episode of Unfiltered.
Well, we hope so because Monday I will not be here.
Yes, that is correct.
I will be chasing leprechauns across the pond in Ireland. So
I hope that you have safe travels in your destination to Ireland and the islands there in the next 2 weeks. You have a nice long vacation, I'm sure well-deserved.
Yeah.
I also want to take a moment, because we talked about this last Thursday, and first say thank you to the Yukon Huskies women's and men's basketball team. Great seasons. We didn't get the national championships that we were looking for, but great games. There are some great players who ended their careers this past weekend and Monday night, and we definitely, being local fans of the Yukon Huskies, want to give them a great congratulations and say a season well played, and we look forward to Husky basketball again next year.
Yeah, definitely. It was a great season and very exciting ending, and
it's always exciting when you have a university this close that both men's and women's teams were right there. At the end. So good job for both teams. This is our Thursday, April 9th episode of Right Now. And if you tuned in on Monday to Mike's show, Unfiltered, we talked a little bit about ECS funding. And I want to provide you with an opportunity to give us some local perspective here, Mike, since that's your forte. And I'm going to provide the state legislative comparison to that, just to kind of preface this to our listeners. The ECS funding grant is approximately right now $2.46 billion annually that is provided to local school districts to assist in funding. However, that number has not been adjusted, even for inflation, since 2013, flat. And we just talked about this last week on both of our shows, that it again is going to remain flat, because that's what the Appropriations Committee in Hartford just voted on. And this is really disappointing because it's going to directly affect our local property taxes.
Sure, and it was a big concern. I know last night the Board of Finance had made a decision to come up with some cuts, and they set dates on referendums, and Curtis and Ayler and Chuck really they pushed to try to get that date, especially Curtis pushing to get that date moved ahead, to actually let the state come out of session and maybe something would change, hoping, because a lot of our programs rely on this funding, and if the state doesn't fund it, the taxpayers do.
Right.
And you're at a point where the taxpayers just can't afford anymore. It's not that they don't want to, they're unwilling. It's just there's no more in the pockets. The pockets are empty, and people really don't understand that. And it's locally it's the spending. It's spending's got to be curbed, but we need that state funding. There's a lot of unfunded mandates, and you've got to kind of feel for the school boards and all the people trying to make this happen.
Yeah, there's tough decisions being made.
Right, with inflation the way it is. And, it's easy to point the finger to, somebody saying, I want to be conservative, fiscally conservative. I don't want to spend that cash. But on the other hand, we are a very poor community. We don't get the amount of funding that we need. And our legislators really got to step up the game, because we need funding in Windham.
Yeah, and to give you a couple of examples of how this directly affects in a monetary value, if we look at the 2013 per pupil amount that the ECS grant funds, you're at right around $11,525 per pupil.
Okay.
Even if you only took into inflation into account,
right,
and nothing else, that number should be closer to 16,000, or probably just in excess of 16,000 per pupil for current day inflation rate adjustment.
Right, and that's just going on the inflation. That's not including all the new unfunded mandates that the states put on us since 2013.
Yeah. So when you look at total, you're looking at a shortfall that Connecticut property owners, through their property taxes, are going to have to pay, and it amounts to about $820 million to overcome that shortfall. We talked about this just before the show started. One of the most significant things that happens in your life is the ability to purchase a home.
Sure.
Okay? Greatest opportunity to not only build equity for yourself, but also generational wealth that you can pass on to your children. They're taking that away from us. You look at people that are on a fixed income, someone who probably owns their house but now is paying exorbitant amounts in property taxes year after year on a fixed income, a retiree. It's not sustainable.
Right. It's nothing. It's nothing in this area to have someone in their 70s, 80 years old on these fixed incomes paying anywhere between $9,000 and $10,000 a year in taxes. That's like paying a mortgage, you know. And there's no relief in sight. And there's nothing. They're not getting anything for their service.
Right. I was sitting here just before the show started, and I started thinking about it. With my property taxes, I'm on pace to pay the equal amount in property taxes in about 18 years that I spent on my house.
Sure.
That's absurd. Like,
it really is.
You have now taken that amount of money away, and there are services that are required, and we want I don't think we're ever going to be back to a place where there's no property tax in Connecticut. No. But there has to be some sort of a cap on this and the yearly increases. And right now, the legislation that is being passed in Hartford is not showing any indication of that. The unaffordability issues are not being addressed.
Right.
And we're going to talk about that in a few minutes with a couple of the bills that I'm going to bring up. But to get back on this conversation with ECS funding, we've mentioned in previous episodes of not only Right Now, but also your show Unfiltered, how there are local boards of education that are making those very difficult decisions as to what services are going to be cut, what staffing is going to have to be cut back in order to meet these budgetary constraints, because you can't keep going to the taxpayers and saying, we need more, we need more, we need more, without some sort of explanation or relief, and that has to come from the state legislature right now.
It does, because I'm a big one. You always hear me complaining about top-heavy administrations, things like this, and I'm not going back on that. I do think that our administrator, we're top-heavy administratively. A lot of that is mandated by the government. The state mandates how many people in certain roles, but even if you were to cut and take and say, hey, cut the administration, cut this, you can only cut it for this year, and next year that cut is it's not there, but you're still having the added expenses. They still keep adding in, these unfunded mandates. So they've got to stop funding them because it's going to become unaffordable, and it's almost like they're doing it by design.
I agree with you in that. I do. And you see this not only in what we're talking about right now with ECS funding, but in other aspects of the legislature where there's this continuous layering of energy policy that is just simply passed through taxes right on to the ratepayers in your electric bill, the public benefits. We talked about that. I'm going to talk about some specific bills. We might get to it in the first segment, but possibly in the second segment where those affordability issues are not being addressed either. Right. So not only do we have, like you're saying, 1,400 unfunded mandates on not only our schools, but our municipalities that are the single greatest driver of property tax increases over the past couple of decades. But there's an in general increase in the cost of living across the board that we have to be concerned about. So you have to look at what some of these factors are that are contributing to it. And we talked about this on Monday, and I want to bring up some of these businesses again because we kind of previewed it. But we've seen where so many of the industries and corporations in Connecticut have left over the past 3 to 4 decades because they've seen the forecast for the future indicating that this is not an environment that they can continue to be profitable in.
Yeah.
And when these businesses leave, they take with them not only a local tax base, but also in general, a lot of the employees. The employees are either opting to get out in early retirement or looking for other jobs, or they're following the company to wherever this other destination is and relocating out of the state. So some of these ones, the one that I mentioned on Monday that just left, Stanley Black & Decker in the New Britain area. They had a headquarters right there in New Britain, Farmington, and they've left. That was a large employer in that area of the state. I lived there for a while in Plainville and worked in the area in Farmington. Had a number of people that I knew that worked for that company. Mm-hmm. But you look at some of the other ones in the area there, ESPN is leaving. Yep. We looked at one of the big ones in Eastern Connecticut, Rogers Corporation. How many people were employed through the 70s, 80s, 90s, early 2000s at Rogers Corp? Gone. Some of the ones down at the other end of the state where technology was a large employer, GE, Raytheon, United Technologies, Carrier, Otis, Duracell, Pitney Bowes, Xerox, the list goes on and on of these companies that have left Connecticut because of a poor environment for them to do business in and to be able to be a large employer. So where has that employment base now gone to? But we talked about this on Monday, state employees.
Sure.
And while there's state employees that can do great work and do a good job, we have created such a huge state employee pool that it has become a burden on the taxpayers of Connecticut.
Right.
And we talked about that because of the liabilities to long-term pensions that we are now experiencing. We're number one in the nation for state employee benefits.
Right. I mean, it's the destination for to come and and then retire and leave. Mm-hmm. There's we're at a point now with the state employees, the unions, and everything else. And don't get me wrong, I feel there was definitely a time and a place for a union, but I think it's time to rein in now on contracts and all these sweetheart deals they're getting because the taxpayers can't pay for it. And when these big companies leave, and like you say, they're taking these employees with them, they're moving down south. Not only does it affect that, but you think about the local store, the local restaurant that these people went to for lunch. They, all the places that they visited, they're now also feeling it because they're not there. Right. There's so many things that are involved in running a bigger business, and we are pushing businesses right out of the state.
Yeah. And to look even further to the consumer market, look at all the malls in Connecticut that were constructed through the 80s and 90s, and now some of them are just slowly dying.
Right. The Crystal Mall is gone. I was there the other day picking a couple things up that had been left behind. But it's empty. And you were to shoulder with people, a few years back.
Yeah, and it's true that some of the things like Amazon have taken over for a lot of that, but it still lends to the greater picture, the bigger picture of the fact that Connecticut is so unaffordable that these malls are even now struggling to keep storefronts open because they have to charge such a large amount for rent and utilities and everything else that goes along with operating a business like that.
You think about it, and not only you talk about retail that happening too, but look who else is being pushed out. You've seen Healthcare.
Mm-hmm.
Look at our healthcare system. Try to find a doctor or an office in Connecticut in this area now. You're not getting the medical care because they don't want to be here.
Mm-hmm. And that's a great point, because we just saw in the past year Connecticut, the state of Connecticut, now becoming part of the healthcare system.
Right.
And we actually had to go through an emergency session with change in legislature and laws that allowed the University of Connecticut to form subsidiaries that would be able to purchase and manage and run not only Waterbury, but Bristol and also Day Kimball Hospital. Mm-hmm. Now, we've talked about this in previous episodes, that some of this concern about these hospitals was through mismanagement because of private equity firms that had purchased them over the previous decade. However, now the state is going to be bailing out these hospitals, and the way that that's going to be done is through purchases through the Yukon 2000 reconstruction legislature and Yukon 2000 expansion that will now allow these hospitals to use state bonding for expenditures. It could be capital expenditures for repairs, for new services, for expansion, for even payroll.
Right.
So there are a lot of concerns about us taking such a sudden leap into the healthcare industry, especially when we're looking at hospitals that were not doing so well just a very short time ago, and in fact owe the state a very large amount of tax money.
It doesn't. It makes zero sense, and it's just another way where our state politicians are just getting deeper and deeper and deeper.
Well, it does make sense when you look at one thing that is very important. Okay, as of May of 2025, we had approximately 1,090,000 individuals enrolled in the Medicaid program, Husky Health in Connecticut. That accounts for about 30.2% of the population. Why wouldn't the state see nearly a third of the population needing health care and suddenly say, hey, we can become the provider for that?
Right.
So there are concerns about, and we talked about this also, the state of Connecticut is looking for ways to get into other businesses and to branch out. We talked about them thinking about buying an WNBA team and moving it from the casino to Hartford so it could be in competition with other, sports teams and have to pay to be a participant there. The state sometimes, I think, is not fully looking at this. They want to be involved in these things. They want to get into this system. They want to provide this type of healthcare system to Connecticut residents, but it's going to be backed on the taxpayers.
Sure. And we all know what a great job the state does with everything that they jump into.
Yeah.
If anybody can give me a success story, I'll call right in and let me know. But it seems like every time the state jumps into something, there's a failure.
I'm going to agree with you. Like, there have been a lot of that. We've seen that time and time again. We definitely have not seen policies in the past few decades that have created the environment that will stimulate Connecticut growth.
Right.
So we have to look at that. We're a couple minutes before the end of our first segment here on Right Now. I do want to remind all of our listeners that you can also check out Right Now and Mike's show Unfiltered, which is on Mondays from 3 to 4 p.m., by going to WILI.com. You can go to podcasts. You can scroll all the way down and see both Unfiltered and Right Now that you can listen to in a podcast format. You can also go to YouTube and you can search WILI and Right Now or Unfiltered and see the in-studio video recordings that we do here. You can also now go on to Charter Public Access. Spectrum. I'm sorry. My bad. Dating myself here. Yeah. Spectrum Public Access Channel 192, Tuesdays, 6:30. I have the 6:30 to 7:30 slot. And then Saturdays, 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. And you can see Mike and I on this episode of Unfiltered on Public Access Channel 192. That started just this week on April 7th, 2 days ago. And our producer, Matt, his show also debuted last week, Homegrown. So be sure to look at all of the media options that we have on WILI and see all of the broadcasts that are here on 95.3 FM. We're getting to the bottom of the hour. I'm going to preview a couple things that we're going to talk about in our second segment. We have a recent reporting about violent crime rates in Connecticut actually dropping.
Nice.
So we're going to discuss that. The other thing that I want to bring up, and this goes kind of into what we were just talking about now, is a big story which I had mentioned months ago and kind of said this is what I expected. And it's looking at healthcare fraud in California. This is a national story that's been coming out right now. I'm going to give you my kind of take on a few things related to that, and we're going to talk about some of the issues that go along with this and some of the concerns that we should be looking at in Connecticut, because I think this is a pattern that we're starting to see across a number of different blue states. As we're getting to the bottom of the hour, I want to thank Wyndham Ministries, Building Strong Foundations for Tomorrow, one of our sponsors. Be sure to tune in Mondays to Unfiltered with Mike Desaulniers on WILI from 3 to 4 p.m. And, of course, you can always listen here to Right Now on Thursdays. Mike, you have a couple things coming up here in the next few weeks in Wyndham with your budget that is going to be finalized. And you mentioned a few minutes ago how you really wish that these budgetary decisions will be put off.
Right.
Because right now we are still a couple of weeks away from the state legislature making their final votes to this short session, which was supposed to be just for budgetary adjustments, but we've seen that go way off the rails.
Right.
But you mentioned that, and I think that's, again, something that we need to look at also, because you're right that there's an overlapping of time here where there's a lot of questions. What's going to happen? What if? Are we going to get this funding? Are we not going to get this funding?
Right. So, I mean, you set these dates for these hearings before the end of the session, and you rely on a certain amount of money. And if that money doesn't come, then you've even got to make deeper cuts. Right. And then if the money does come in, what do you do? Where do you put the money? So it seems like it would be a lot better off for the taxpayers if we just waited, till after the sessions were over, and then we could make an educated decision on what's got to be done.
Certainly, that would relieve a lot of the stress that I'm sure many Board of Finance members and town council members and first selectmen in the area, boards of education have to be concerned with. There is a lot of questions out there as to whether funding will remain flat or increase. Now, there are some rumblings that the message is starting to get through. I said on Monday's show that there are a number of letters that have been drafted by first selectmen, mayors of towns around Connecticut. I've read several of them, one from Eastern Connecticut, one from down in the Fairfield County area, that really are addressing this educational cost-sharing grant budgetary change and the lack of change and lack of improvement in funding from the state. So this is something that we will be continuing to report on and provide you information on. But that's going to be, I think, something that really we have to keep an eye on for the next few weeks because this is going to be to great impact to what's going to happen for our local town budgets. And as you said, Mike, some of these towns within the 29th district, the 9 towns that go from Mansfield and Wyndham all the way up through Thompson, we have some communities that are struggling financially.
Sure
we
do.
have some school districts that are having difficulty meeting the mandates and the budgetary constraints by these towns. You look at how many of these go to referendum because there is, this impact that's being felt by property taxpayers throughout Connecticut. And if something isn't done, we're going to be in a position where there's going to be a significant jump in property taxes again. As much as we don't want to predict this, it's bound to happen because it is all coming back to the local property taxpayer. It's something that the state is not willing to acknowledge and deal with. So we're going to continue to follow this story and continue to provide information on this to our listeners. We appreciate you for listening here to Right Now. We're going to take a quick commercial break. When we come back, we will open up the phone line, so you can be sure to call in to 860-456-1400, and we'll be back in about 4 minutes. This is Right Now on WILI. Welcome back to Right Now. I'm Chris Reddy. I have in studio with me my co-host, Mike Desaulniers. This is WILI 95.3 FM, and we spent our first segment talking about some of the affordability issues here in Connecticut and how they're affecting us locally. Specifically, we spent a lot of that time talking about the educational cost sharing grant and how the grant at the Hartford legislative level is remaining flat for, again, another year. This has been a flat grant amount since 2013. Definitely long overdue for some adjustment to give us, the local property taxpayers, a little bit of relief. As we get into our second segment, we're going to highlight a couple of things, but to just kind of wrap up on educational cost sharing and this amount, I want to provide just that little bit of information that when we look at the $2.46 billion that is provided from the state legislature through this educational cost sharing, it is a formula that they use that determines the amount per pupil that each school district is going to get. And the shortfall that we're estimating right now annually is about $820 million that is falling onto local property taxpayers. Really nothing in Hartford this legislative session is addressing some of the affordability issues that we've tried to describe here on this show and on your show, Mike, also on Mondays. And it really is time that we voice how concerning this is. For years now, we've seen in some towns double-digit property tax increases year after year after year. And a lot of that, as we said, has come from these unfunded mandates that are put onto our schools and our municipalities. It really is something, we still have time in this legislative session. There are still some weeks left where you can reach out to your legislator and say, enough's enough. We need to make some adjustments in the way this ECS grant is calculated so that the brunt of this shortfall is not being taken on by local property taxpayers.
Yeah, definitely, because they're the only ones that can do it. The legislators, they can get it done. You've got to reach out to them, you know. Mm-hmm. They're all around come election time, and they tell you everything you want to hear. Mm-hmm. But let's see if they'll come through for you, because you know, smaller towns are getting killed. Just, you know, right now in Wyndham, it looks like you're probably going to be right around a 4% increase in taxes this year. Yep. And that's you know, if we get what we're expecting, that's if, you know, a child, let's say somebody with special needs moves into your town, you haven't budgeted for, the state mandates, you know, a certain amount of services. Yeah. So we have to provide these services. And, you know, hey, what's the chance of 8 people needing special services moving into town? It's not that unheard of.
Absolutely not. And in fact, you're seeing some of these smaller school districts that do have good specialized education programs seeing an increase in the number of pupils that they are helping in the school district. You also there was another point that I wanted to make up as you were talking there, and that's the fact that the state oftentimes doesn't reimburse local school districts, especially when it comes to education associated with, with transportation associated with special education. That can be a huge expense, and oftentimes that is not reimbursed until it reaches a certain threshold, and that can be as high as $100,000 in costs until the state says, well, we'll give you some money back.
Sure.
And it's definitely not that whole amount. So this is a big concern looking forward, not only through this last month of the legislative cycle. You still have an opportunity to contact your legislator and say that you want to see something different happen. But also, we're about 6.5 months away from election time. So really pay attention to who it is that is looking out for your best interest as a taxpayer and as a ratepayer, because we're going to be talking about electrical rates in just a few minutes here, one of our favorite topics, and I have some update on that. But really look at the voting record of these legislators and see who it is that's dealing with affordability and taking into account your concerns about affordability in Connecticut, because we have been on a path for a long time, and I've said this over and over again, our population is flat, but our state appropriated spending is up almost 300% in the past 3 decades.
Right.
And that's because one party has been in charge.
And you know that one party has been in charge. We hear it time and time again. But, take a look at legislation that's been put forward, in this session that was supposed to be about saving the taxpayer money, but they're not even. We have a local legislator that's not even putting anything in for that, but yet putting things in to take over elections, to take power away from, to give power to a single party. This is what these people are worried about. They are worried about their one job, their little piece of the pie, and getting that reelection. They're not worried about anyone else, and it's not a story that we're telling. You can go look this stuff up yourself. You can see what they're putting in. It is not to benefit, the local taxpayer.
So let's take this a step further, because we talked about property taxes, one of the biggest costs that a homeowner has, besides the actual purchase of the home and the mortgage. Second only to that has got to be your electric bill. When it comes to home expenses. And I've talked about, over the past couple of weeks, several climate initiatives. And again, I'm going to say that we want to move towards renewable energy sources, towards green energy. But the single greatest driver in your electrical rates is these overlapping layers of energy policy. Every single legislative session added to the public benefits, those 50-plus charges are all government-related programs. Those should not be part of your electric bill. Those are things that should be debated on the floor of the House, on the floor of the Senate in Hartford. You have to, again, look at what these legislators are voting and see that so many of these bills are driving up costs.
Right.
We talked about a couple weeks ago the Super Climate Fund, which is looking to assess energy producers going back all the way to the 1990s for emissions that they've expelled from their facilities. That alone, this Climate Super Fund, they're estimating that it could be as high as 33 cents per gallon of gasoline, diesel, and home heating oil for every single consumer in Connecticut. There's another one that just came out, Senate Bill 453. This is going to add a 5% surcharge on insurance policies that are tied to energy infrastructure. So as something is built to increase our energy infrastructure grid, there's going to be a 5% surcharge. That's another pass-through tax that is going to increase our electrical costs.
Yep.
Part of this Senate Bill 453 also creates a climate resilience fund that has no spending cap or expiration date.
Dangerous.
So again, this is, and I'll refer back to a report that I referenced a couple months ago, and it is that when you have these continuous layers of energy policy, it is the single greatest driving factor to increasing our electrical rates in every single monthly bill. These are things that we need to remove from our bill, and then also make sure that this is something that if the state wants to be a part of this, it's something that we actually can have a debate on, and not just simply something that appears on a piece of paper that shows up in your mailbox.
Right. It's really it's crazy how Eversource, this independent company, has such a big grasp on everything with the way our politicians let this stuff happen. It makes zero sense to me.
But and you're right, it's through, and we really can't totally blame Eversource in this. In fact, I blame Eversource very minimally on some of these problems. I see it as PURA, which is the regulatory board being that intermediary between the state legislature, Eversource, and the customers.
Right.
So when you have well, first of all, I'm going to go back and say that for a long time we had concerns because PURA was not its full 5-board committee.
Right.
So I have questions about whether a group of 3 PURA regulators can represent a quorum to be able to do that. In fact, there was a point where we only had 2 PURA regulators. So we are up to a full appointed board of 5. However, when we look at the appointees, they are very politically aligned in one direction.
Right.
So we still are not seeing something that is really relief in the way of help with our energy bills coming from PURA. And PURA is the one that is going to set those rate amounts.
Right.
Now, I have a couple things that I do want to say about this. Just recently, Eversource sent a letter to the legislature and PURA saying that they did not want to participate in 3 publicly bid contracts for future power purchase agreements for solar.
Okay.
We've talked about this in past episodes also. When you look at the power purchase agreements, which are those future amounts of money that Eversource is spending to create solar fields.
Yep.
And this one is a large one. It involves about 54 megawatts, which is a huge amount of power. It's going to cost about $238 million over the life of the program, which is expected to be about 20 years. But I have questioned whether solar panels are really going to even remain at a level of efficiency that makes them worthwhile at 20 years at this point.
Of age, yeah.
This is all going to go onto the public benefits charge. Wow. And when Eversource says, look, we can't go to the customers and say, guess what? Another $238 billion or $238 million you're responsible for. That's going to create another significant increase in the public benefits charge portion of our bill. This is only just about a week and a half ago that this letter was received by the legislature. And many of these solar and wind power purchase agreements are 300% of the average cost right now of rate production. So when we look at it from other sources, this is something that's not sustainable. Again, we're layering these energy policies one on top of another over and over again, creating an environment where, fortunately, a couple of years ago, they finally showed us this public benefits portion of the bill. We didn't know that it was there before that. It was hidden. So at least now we're seeing it. But again, this is something that if you want really fundamental change in things such as the public benefits charge on your electric bill, it has to be something that's done legislatively. Right now, this is simply a pass-through form of taxation that you are paying as a ratepayer.
Yep.
So not only are they coming after you in property taxes, they're coming after you in your electric bill also.
And do we have any legislators that are currently fighting this? Do we have any?
There are some.
Okay.
But it pretty much goes along party line right now, and I can tell you that a lot of these bills are passing, and it's exactly as you'd expect. 25 Democrat senators, 11 Republican senators, and that's how the yay nays go.
Right, and they're just passing it through and hoping that Joe homeowner doesn't realize what they're doing.
You're right, but they are also passing through so much of this without public hearing.
Right.
Because we have emergency certifications, or we had the situation a couple weeks ago where they actually cut off public testimony early.
Mm-hmm.
Because
I heard that.
we reached 12:15 in the evening or 12:15 at night, and they didn't want to stay and listen anymore. And that really shows you, it's very telling as to the environment in Hartford right now, where they are just pushing through this legislation without the proper, I'm going to say, important testimony of not only the public, but of professionals in the industries that might comment on this through written testimony or public testimony, and also through the ability for there to be political debate and discourse over each one of these issues. When you are pushing this off onto hidden taxes in our bills and hidden taxes that are simply going to be assessed on a corporation or a business or an energy producer and then passed through to us, there's no way that an energy producer is going to be assessed by the state legislature and not pass those costs on to the ratepayer, which is us.
Yeah, it just amazes me. We have so many people out there that are, protesting different things, and that there's that many people that want to get involved and want to but nobody's paying attention to this. And this is what's driving people out of their homes. It's driving, it's pulling families apart, because you're not going to have the same dynamic if mom and dad are working 2-3 jobs, or single parent homes that never see their kids because they have to work so much. Or you've got the alternative where you've got somebody who's on a different benefit program who it's not worth it for them, to realistically go out and obtain employment that's going to do the same thing they're getting now.
And you're right. By far, the first demographics that are going to be affected by these type of policy changes and increased costs are going to be seniors, and then young families and first-time home buyers.
Sure.
I mean, we already know that there's statistics that have come out recently saying that you can pretty much expect to be in your 40s as a first-time home buyer.
Right.
Looking forward, like there are very few, people who are in a position in Connecticut to purchase a home in their 20s.
Right. I mean, you think about it, it was something that, back when we were starting out our families, and, it was very obtainable. You had to work hard, but it was obtainable. And now, I look at it, for my kids, and it's unless they've got some luck behind them, it's going to be tough.
And I'll tell you what the solution is from the state legislation. They want to now help subsidize not only mortgages for first-time home buyers, but also down payments. And the concern that I have there is that we are setting people up, and we're setting that program up for failure.
Sure.
You are right now in a housing market in Connecticut where you are putting people into a very difficult situation, being able to afford their home, afford the bills, afford the property taxes. And my concern is that a program like this that is going to be subsidized by the taxpayer, again, is something that's not going to benefit the taxpayer.
Right. Because if the subsidy comes in, are they going to be able to afford the house and keep it up? Is you know what's going to happen with that? There's so many things, and you always want the best for everyone. You want people
certainly
to get their dream, to get their house, but with the current state that we're in, it's unaffordable. It's just undoable because of all the mandates.
Yeah. So we have just a few minutes left. We're going to talk about one last thing here, and I previewed this at the beginning of the session segment, and this is in regards to Medicaid fraud in California, because I think that this is a preview of what we're going to see happening across many blue states in the upcoming months. I said this a few months ago, and I said that I expected the fraud simply in healthcare in California to exceed $100 billion, and it looks like that is right on the money. Mm-hmm. We're over that. Some of these are like absolutely horrible situations.
Yep.
When you understand how fraud is occurring in the hospice programs, now hospice is supposed to be palliative care at the very end of someone's life because of a terminal illness.
Right.
It could be a cancer, it could be congestive heart failure or kidney failure, whatever the case may be. You are within months of the end of your life, so we want to help the most delicate and fragile of these people to be as comfortable as possible during this time.
Right.
In Los Angeles alone, they had almost 1,170 hospice centers apply for licensing. Mm-hmm. This is more than anywhere else in the nation by like staggering numbers. And what the audit report that I read detailed was that the state of California, the enrollment specialists, started recognizing that they thought that there might be potential fraud here, but rather than stopping anything, they approved the licenses.
Wow.
Okay? Some of these hospice centers charged Medicaid and Medicare services hundreds of millions of dollars and then discharge patients at a rate that was like 97%. These weren't the people who expired like they were supposed to. Like a hospice center is supposed to have a 97% death rate.
Sure.
These are ones that now were bilking the system for as long as they possibly could and then discharging people because they weren't actually in this need for palliative care.
Right.
Right. Some of the other things they're starting to see are the abuse through the pharmaceutical reimbursement plans, and that there were some extremely expensive medications. And in one case, they have someone who was just charged in 11 months. This person, through the California Medicaid system, charged up $270 million in medications in 11 months.
Wow.
That the taxpayers are now on the dime for. These are serious concerns because this is the type of thing that really strains our systems because they're trusting systems.
Right.
These are systems where we ask people to sign up. We want to help you, but it is now just completely corrupt and fraudulent.
Right, right.
And we need to really look at this. And for the fact that California had a plan where they would simply approve them and then go back and look later is the wrong approach. Mm-hmm. We want to be trusted. We want to provide services to people. We don't want to be ripped off.
That's right.
All right.
That's right.
We're coming to the top of the hour now. This has been another episode of Right Now with Chris Reddy and Mike Desaulniers. Thank you so much for listening. We will be back next week, Thursday, 3 to 4 p.m., and I will be guest hosting Unfiltered with Curtis Ayler while Mike is on his vacation. So safe travels, Mike. We'll talk to you on Monday. This has been Right Now on 95.3 FM WILI.